The Panic of 1873 destroyed millions of American lives. It also created four of the greatest fortunes in history. While ordinary Americans lost their farms, their savings, and their jobs, four men were doing something different. They were buying everything they could get their hands on, at prices nobody had ever seen before. And when the Depression ended, they owned America. John D. Rockefeller did not come from money. He started as a clerk, earning 50 cents a day. By 1863, he was in the oil business in Cleveland. By 1870, he had founded Standard Oil. And by 1873, when the Depression hit and his competitors were desperate, he was ready. Rockefeller's strategy was simple and devastating. He approached struggling refineries with an offer: sell to Standard Oil or be destroyed by it. Standard Oil controlled the railroad's pricing for oil shipments through secret rebate agreements, meaning Rockefeller's oil moved cheaper than anyone else's. Competitors couldn't survive. By 1879, Standard Oil controlled 90% of America's oil refining capacity. By 1911, the Supreme Court ordered its breakup as an illegal monopoly. By then, Rockefeller was worth $900 million, equivalent to roughly $29 billion today. America's first billionaire, built on the ruins of 1873. Andrew Carnegie arrived in America from Scotland at age 13 with nothing. He worked as a bobbin boy in a cotton factory, then a telegraph messenger, then a railroad superintendent. Then, during the Civil War, he began investing. Carnegie understood one thing that his competitors didn't. The Depression was a buying opportunity. While other steel producers were collapsing under the weight of the 1873 panic, Carnegie bought their equipment, their mills, their infrastructure at pennies on the dollar. He drove down costs through relentless efficiency. He paid his workers as little as possible and worked them as long as possible. By 1889, Carnegie Steel was producing more steel than all of Britain. In 1901, he sold Carnegie Steel to J.P. Morgan for $480 million, making him the wealthiest man in the world at the time. He spent the rest of his life giving it away. Over 2,500 public libraries, universities, concert halls. The man who had exploited thousands of workers spent his final decades funding the institutions that educated their children. Cornelius Vanderbilt was already 79 years old when the Panic of 1873 hit. He had made his first fortune in steamships, then pivoted to railroads in the 1860s with ruthless precision. His approach was consolidation. In 1867, he won control of the New York Central Railroad by driving down its stock price, then merged it with his Hudson River line to create a continuous route from New York to Buffalo. He added the Lakeshore and Michigan Southern Railway in 1873, extending his network all the way to Chicago, at the exact moment the panic was destroying his competitors. By the time Vanderbilt died in 1877, he was worth $100 million, the largest private fortune in American history to that point. He left almost all of it to his son William, who doubled it within 8 years. J.P. Morgan was born into wealth, but he turned inherited advantage into something that made every other fortune in America look modest. Morgan didn't build industries. He bought them, financed them, reorganized them, and took controlling stakes in return. He financed the merger of Edison General Electric and Thomson Houston Electric to create General Electric. He consolidated Federal Steel and multiple other companies to form United States Steel, the first billion-dollar corporation in American history. He dominated railroads. He dominated banking. He dominated everything he touched. When the Panic of 1907 threatened to collapse the American financial system, Morgan personally organized the bailout. He locked the most powerful bankers in New York inside his private library and refused to let them leave until they agreed to pool their resources. Sound familiar? It should. We covered it in video 1. Because J.P. Morgan's private intervention in 1907, one unelected man deciding the fate of the American economy, made Congress so uncomfortable that 3 years later, 6 men boarded a private railway car in New Jersey under cover of darkness. and went to Jekyll Island to build the Federal Reserve. The robber baron era didn't just create vast wealth, it created the conditions for everything that came after. The term robber baron first appeared in the New York Times in 1859, comparing Cornelius Vanderbilt to the medieval German lords who extorted tolls from merchants traveling the Rhine. By the 1880s, it applied to any industrialist whose wealth seemed to come at the public's expense. Their methods were consistent across all four men. Monopoly. Eliminate competition until you control pricing entirely. Political capture. Their business empires ultimately forced the creation of antitrust law, labor protections, and financial regulations that still shape the American economy. And exploitation. Workers in Carnegie's steel mills worked 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week. Rockefeller's refinery workers had no safety protections. Vanderbilt's railroad workers were paid starvation wages. When workers struck, the robber barons called in Pinkerton agents or federal troops. The same federal troops President Hayes had deployed against striking railroad workers in 1877. The same workers the Depression had destroyed. History has never fully settled what to call these men. Critics at the time saw monopolists who crushed competitors, exploited workers, and bent government to their will. Defenders saw visionaries who built the infrastructure of the modern American economy: the railroads, the steel, the oil, the electricity, faster and more efficiently than any government program could have. Both are true. Carnegie and Rockefeller dominated both education and medicine, not only in philanthropy, but in regulatory influence and government contracts. Though some would say they have educated and saved countless lives, the answer to whether they were robber barons or captains of industry depends entirely on which decade you examine, and whether you were a shareholder or a steelworker. By 1890, the four men at the center of this video controlled more wealth than the bottom half of the American population combined. They had built that wealth in less than 20 years. On the ruins of the Depression that Jay Cooke had triggered in 1873, the panic had wiped out the weak and made the strong invincible. And the financial system that had allowed it, the system without a central bank, without antitrust law, without labor protections, without meaningful regulation, was beginning to crack under the weight of what it had created. 4 more panics in 30 years, until finally, the panic of 1907 put J.P. Morgan in the position of personally deciding the fate of the American economy. And the government decided that could never happen again. You already know what they built instead. The vault gets richer, and somewhere, always somewhere, something else is burning. Next video, the Panic of 1907, the last financial crisis before the Federal Reserve, the one that made Jekyll Island inevitable. Subscribe to Vault in Ruin. We go where the money went.